Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We're talking, Landis, about what we believe or we think possibly or will be Ohio State's new rival in the Big Ten, and that's the Oregon Ducks, and getting ready for this Ohio State visit to Oregon on October 12th. Oregon had its spring game this past Saturday. We covered that on Kings of the North. Of course, we would invite anybody watching or listening to this to also try out Kings of the North, where we discuss all the teams in Northern football. We've done the Ohio State spring game a couple weeks ago. We did the Michigan spring game, the Notre Dame spring game. The big games this past weekend were Oregon and Nebraska. So that's what's on our latest Kings of the North episode. But we were intrigued by Oregon and the way they looked. And so that led us to wanting to do this show, which will include Jeremy Birmingham joining us in the middle part of the episode to talk about Ohio State versus Oregon recruiting. Then we'll talk a little bit about the transfer portal with Ohio State. We'll finish up with what you're watching, what you eating, what you're thinking. When the Big Ten initially expanded in this go-round, and it was UCLA and USC, I think a lot of us obviously jumped to like, okay, here comes USC. How's USC going to fit into this Big Ten that's been dominated by Ohio State traditionally? Clearly, Michigan has risen up in the last couple of years. USC is going to make it a big three. Now Oregon and Washington are joining the party as well. Has Oregon replaced USC in all of our thinking that way when we think about the new Big Ten?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're probably more than one notch above, I think, where USC is at the moment. Like, USC has aspirations to be a team that wins the Big Ten and gets to the college football playoff, but it hasn't been a team that's won its conference or gotten to the college football playoff. And Oregon did it the first year of the playoff and has been in contention a couple of other times. So I think they absolutely have. And I almost think that Oregon has now joined the Big Ten and passed Penn State as well. It's not a big three. I think it's still a big four with Oregon in there joining Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State. But if I had to separate even that four, I think I would remove Penn State from the conversation and have it be Oregon, Ohio State, and Michigan.
We will definitely do Big Ten program rankings at some point on this show in the offseason. We'll reevaluate this new 18-team Big Ten. Just so people have an understanding, and again, if you're not watching Kings of the North, and why aren't you? But if you're not, we've stated this before. The general belief for us is that Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Oregon are the four best teams in college football entering the season as it stands now.
Yeah, but I think that's pretty widely held belief across college football too. Yeah,
that is not a KOTN exclusive.
No, but we like to take credit for starting it, but no.
Yeah,
it's not exclusive. Yeah.
I mean, if it was really a KOTN exclusive, we'd be like Ohio State, Oregon, huge gap. Michigan, Syracuse, Iowa State, huge gap. Georgia. That would be the KOTN rankings if we were doing that. I don't know, people. I do have a Georgia hat that I'm gonna start wearing it at appropriate times on Kings of the North. But I do want the Kings of Columbus audience to understand what it's like to have a dog mentality, right? Do I look like I have a dog mentality? This is my dog mentality phase. Dog mentality. So, no, I might mess up my hair.
You don't have the Conan O'Brien thing where you just shake your head and your hair falls back into place.
Too much gel in it because I have to have all the gel in it to move it around to cover my bald spots. So it's like you can't. I don't have thick, lustrous hair anymore. I'm at serious. I'm not bald, but I'm at serious conversations with my haircut person stage of life. Listen, we all know what's going on here, right? Do I have to say it out loud? So they're always like, how would you like it? And I'm like, I want it to look like I still have hair. So that's how I want it. Are we on the same page here? Don't cut off so much that people start to know the secret, but I also got to get my money's worth.
Yeah.
Oregon is one of the four best teams in college football going into the season. And we're going to break that down. The two best games, it's actually great. The two best games of the season are going to be Ohio State, Oregon on October 12th, and then Georgia, Texas play on October 19th. It's back to back. And again, we have to embrace this new world where nobody's going to be eliminated. All four of those teams are almost certainly going to make the playoff. So it's an appetizer. It's not an end all be all, but you're going to get a real read on things. It is going to matter potentially for playoff seeding and that kind of thing. So like it matters, but like I'm kind of psyched. I mean, in addition to getting Michigan, Texas, in addition to getting Georgia, Alabama, in addition to getting Ohio State, Michigan, obviously, like there's a lot of really good games this year. But I with the 4 best teams, we also think those are the 2 best games, and they're back to back in mid-October.
I actually didn't realize that. I don't, maybe because I hadn't paid much of attention to Georgia or Texas's schedule. I knew that they played. I knew that right. I knew that they played each other, but I didn't know exactly when. I can't remember. Is the SEC still doing divisions?
No.
So that not only are those appetizers, but like we could see those games a couple other times. Those matchups a couple other times. Yeah.
Texas and Georgia could be on the same path that Ohio State and Oregon might be on, which is the point that you are making here. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I want to talk about the dudes in this, Ryan Day versus Dan Lanning, before we get into a little bit of an offensive defensive breakdown of Ohio State and Oregon. Why are we doing this in May? Because like it's a banger. So we're not going all the way. We're doing like the little sprinkle of analyzing Oregon and Ohio State and where they are right now, but it's worth doing because the spring games are in. So there's not much is going to change. And I don't think either of them, and we're going to talk about the Ohio State portal, I don't know that either of them are going to add or lose huge guys in the portal. So I think we can truly analyze these teams now. But I want to talk about Ryan Day versus Dan Lanning. And I would tell Ryan Day this to his face. Ryan Day's old. Did you know that?
He's 45 is old?
It is, because I have a stat for you. And I was running through the ages of Big Ten football coaches in the new 18-team Big Ten. This is a very important moment in everyone's life when you realize, and it's not really about age, it's sort of like age in combination with your station and your achievements. And it's personal, but it's more, I think, outside perception. But it's the moment when you're no longer a whippersnapper. Because there are points in your life where you're like, oh man, I am not that old and I am killing it. And that could be anything. You could be an 8-year-old at a lemonade stand and be like, there's a 12-year-old down the street whose lemonade is awful compared to mine. I am killing it. And then you're 14 with a lemonade stand and you're over the hill for a lemonade stand, right? So it can be a variety of ways. Happened to me. You have a lot of responsibility and a pretty high profile for someone in your mid-30s. I think you're still a whippersnapper.
Oh, I don't feel like it.
No?
No.
You got a little whip in you. You got a little snap.
Maybe. Some days are better than others.
I'm out. Let me put on my reading glasses for my defective eyes. Whippersnappers don't have defective eyes. All right. Do you want to guess? I added up the 18 Big Ten coaches. How many are in their 60s, their 50s, their 40s, and their 30s? Okay. I don't want you to think about it too much.
Yeah.
How many do you think are in their 60s? Head coaches in the Big Ten.
One? Two?
Kirk Ferentz and your guy, Kurt Signetti.
Oh, right.
From Indiana, who's getting late jump here. How many do you think are in their 50s?
Let's say 5.
5 is exactly right. Well done.
All right. Nice.
How many do you think are in their 40s?
I'm trying to do math here. So that's 7. 6.
7.
Okay.
So that means there are 4 in their 30s. And here's my point. Ryan Day is 45. He is now the 8th youngest coach in the Big Ten. You know who the youngest coach in the Big Ten is?
Dan Lanning.
Dan Lanning.
Yeah.
He's a whippersnapper. Ryan Day's not. Now, Ryan Day's been edging this way. He's been sneaking out of whippersnapperness. Once you grow a beard, harder to be a whippersnapper. So he kind of embraced that early on. But it's funny to think about the hires recently in the Big Ten. Dan Lanning, Sharon Moore at Michigan, and Ryan Walters were all born within 4 months of each other in 1979. So they're the 3 youngest. And you think about like Oregon and Michigan, there's 2 huge jobs, 2 coaches who are 38. So for Ryan Day, what I like the two biggest thorns, like not even thorns in the side. I mean, they're as good as Ohio State right now. Those head-to-head matchups, he's the old guy in both the Oregon and the Michigan matchup. And I've already belabored the point. It's too late. But that's quite a different thing. When he came in and it's like up against Jim Harbaugh, right? Like Ryan Day is like the young guy who's going to knock people out. And like Ryan Day playing in the national championship game against Alabama and Nick Saban, or Ryan Day in the playoff against Dabo Swinney. Whippersnapper, whippersnapper, whippersnapper. It's flipped. He's now a CEO coach, and not a true CEO coach. He's not in the golf cart phase, but he's given up play calling. He's going to be more about culture on both sides of the ball. And when you think about like what Dan Lanning and Sharon Moore are, they're clearly at different stages. And I also think they got, a little more, how 30 people in their 30s are.
Yeah.
What are they? Generation Z? What are they? Dan Lanning and Sharon Moore, they're just on their Xboxes, getting on the TikTok, right? And Ryan Day is like an old man sitting on the back porch drinking iced tea.
He's got an Instagram account.
Oh, he does? Oh.
Yeah, they were born. You said 1979. I'm assuming because you can't read your own handwriting. They were born in 1986.
Oh. Did I do the bad? Was that bad math? Who was born in 1979? Oh, Jonathan Smith was born in 1979. I apologize. Jonathan Smith and Ryan Day were born in 1979. These three young whippersnappers were born in 1986. You know what I was doing in 1986?
I was 2 years from being born.
I was having a lemonade stand in 1986, just killing it. 12-year-old little Dougie out there with the lemonade stand in 1986.
What were you charging? Was it 25 cents a cup or what?
Oh, no, I was charging like $4 a cup back then. No sense.
So
Dan Lanning is the youngest, Sharon Moore, Ryan Walters, David Braun at Northwestern. Lincoln Riley is 40. So he's the beginning of the age 40. David Braun's the other guy in the 30s. Then PJ Fleck at Minnesota, Deshaun Foster, the new head coach at UCLA, then Ryan Day. Ryan Day and Jonathan Smith are like 3 months apart. Jonathan Smith, the new head coach at Washington State. So anyway, I'm intrigued by that. And it doesn't mean that Ryan Day is going to coach like with a fedora on.
Yeah.
And Dan Lanning's not going to be wearing a tube top, whatever 30-year-olds wear. But it is a little different. But I don't know. What is it? What is a 38? How old are you?
I'm 35.
You're 35. All right. You're in your 30s. You can relate to Dan Lanning.
Yeah.
What do 30-year-olds wear? People in their 30s, not tube tops? I don't know.
Monochromatic t-shirts, apparently.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's happening. But I'm also I'm intrigued by, we thought it was going to be Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley, two offensive gurus. And it's Ryan Day and Dan Lanning, offensive guru versus defensive guru. And I almost kind of like that better. So I think we're going to see this. Who knows? I also predicted Dan Lanning is going to be the Alabama coach in 3 years. So there might be a small window on this, but I'm excited for Ryan Day versus Dan Lanning.
No, I'm excited for it too. I think the offense defense dynamic does like kind of enhance things a little bit. Although, I mean, it's going to be fun when Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley both put their offenses out on the field and like try to outscore each other. And Oregon has a fun offense too, which we'll talk about. But I do like it's not dissimilar from like we've only seen it once, I guess, from like when like Ryan Day went up against Nick Saban. It's just like someone who you hold in very high regard as a defensive mind versus somebody you hold in very high regard as an offensive mind, and what shakes out when you do that. So it's a pretty compelling coaching matchup, and I do find that it like the. So did you ever think Ryan Day was like a young whippersnapper, even like when he started at Ohio State? Because I almost feel like Ohio State's a job that doesn't allow you to be that, even if you are a younger guy when you get that job. Like there's a seriousness about the job that you must have to carry yourself with. Like, whereas like if you're at an Oregon or really anywhere else, maybe aside from like Alabama and Georgia, you can be like a little bit of a mascot and a caricature if you want to be. And I don't know that you can be at Ohio State.
I thought maybe in 19, and maybe it was more, I've never done this before, that kind of idea. And I do think maybe like 2020 Ryan Day and Ohio State beating Clemson was a little bit to me of a young guy like, they got us last year, but we're going to get them this year and we're going to let it rip, and that was, and I think we've talked about, was that the last moment of like true let it rip Ryan Day, which maybe was the last moment of him being a whippersnapper. And then you get to the national championship game and you're a whippersnapper against Nick Saban and you go, oh, this.
Yeah.
And then you lose 3 in a row to Michigan. And as I've talked about, like you come out of the fire on the other side and there's no whip in your snap after that. You are scarred. And he said scarred a million times.
Yeah.
So that I think what people liked about that, I think Ohio State fans liked what I would say was still a little bit of a whippersnapper to Ryan Day. And Dan Lanning is all whippersnapper. Dan Lanning told Deion Sanders to meet him at the 50-yard line. They're gonna throw down. It's like, okay, that's a 30. That was, I mean, like the way he handled the Colorado game last year was a guy in his mid-30s on a Friday night at 1 a.m. at last call. Let's go. And his friends in their 50s are like, come on, man. And
he did do that, but like I also wonder if he had just want to succeed Nick Saban, or if Kirby Smart decided he wanted to go to the NFL and all of a sudden Dan Lanning took over at Georgia, like would he act the same way? I do think the job informs some of the behavior.
I think that's right. Ryan Day, and actually, like we're saying, Ryan Day's old. Ryan Day wanted to fight Lou Holtz, who was 30 years older than him. So that was kind of like the guy in his 30s.
Not decidedly not a whippersnapper, Lou Holtz.
I'll show you what I've got, octogenarian. Let's go. Dan Lanning 22-5 as a head coach. Ryan Day 56-8 as a head coach. Interesting, I think, like a lot of rivalry losses here, right? So I mean, when you think about Ryan Day's losses, 3 are in the playoff: Clemson, Bama, and Georgia. And then 3 are rivalry games to Michigan. Then you have the Missouri Bowl game, and you have the regular season Oregon loss before Dan Lanning got to Oregon. Dan Lanning has 5 losses. He lost to Georgia in his very first game, the regular season in 2022. And then his 4 other games are rivalry losses: 3 times to Washington, 1 time to Oregon State. So I just think they're on very similar paths, I think. And the part of that I think Ohio State fans need to take in is that I don't know that Oregon is beneath Ohio State under Dan Lanning in any way. And I think in 2021, when Ohio State lost to Oregon and that Oregon team came into Ohio Stadium and won that game without its best defensive player, that was an upset, right? Both in terms of team and program. I don't think anybody viewed Oregon on the same level of Ohio State in 2021 in September. But I think now they are on the exact same level. Would you characterize these levels as any different?
I would put Ohio State a little bit ahead.
Why?
I think.
Like Ryan Day, Ohio State,
like
Dan Lanning, Oregon.
Well, I guess it depends on how you mean the question. Like branding, resources, national appeal, notoriety. Like I think Ohio State is still on a different level than Oregon is. Like football teams this season, probably pretty even. But like programs, I think Ohio State is still ahead.
What about football programs' projected success in the new world?
Like close, I think.
Okay.
But I think I would still give if Ohio State is now like in this past offseason for Ohio State, I think informs this greatly for me. Like if they are going to aggressively spend the way that they just spent to build this roster, like if that's a thing moving forward, then I don't know how Ohio State like ends up giving up its standing to anybody. Like I don't like Oregon. Oregon has done a really nice job of elevating itself, I think. But as long as Ohio State like stays one step ahead, like I don't know if they're ever actually going to be like neck and neck.
I guess I would wonder. I don't think Ohio State has fallen back. I'm questioning whether Oregon in an NIL world with the Nike resources and a head coach who I think clearly has it. Is there any dispute there? Do we think Dan Lanning's got it? Substance and sizzle?
I don't know. What's his best win?
None of them. None.
Yeah. Right. Like so I don't know.
Deion taking down Colorado and Deion Sanders.
Yeah, it's like Ryan Day has at least Ryan Day has won a playoff game, and won conference 2 conference championships. Like Dan Lanning hasn't done that yet.
I want to rank. Now I just want to do a ranking show. Man, rankings are fun. All right, let's talk about on the field, since this is a brush. The thing that got us excited, and we talked about it on Kings of the North, we're going to talk about it here, is the Ohio State defense versus the Oregon offense. Why did that get us fired up from what we saw both from Ohio State defensively, even not that we saw it in the spring game, we just know it, but then what we know and saw with Oregon offensively?
Just like fireworks on both sides, right? It's just like, and I think Oregon, like Ohio State is going to have, like, I think a lot of sort of like household names, like known commodities, like nationally on its defense, because there's a lot of guys there with high draft potential, and like there's going to be more eyeballs on it because of that. I don't know if Oregon's offense is built quite the same way, but like it will produce statistically as one of the best offenses in the country. It'll be, I think, one of the more exciting offenses to watch. So it's like an electric, explosive, creative offense and a defense with just like freaking dudes all over the place, and a coordinator in Jim Knowles, like, who's not afraid to mix it up either. So it's like a perfect collision of like everything I think you'd want out of a college football offense and a college football defense.
There's two matchups in particular I think are going to be great. One is the Oregon receivers, and Oregon in the spring game, the announcers were talking about, it's a Pac-12 announcing crew still, but obviously from talking to the coaches, they're acting like they have the best receiver group in college football. And of course, Ohio State would have something to say about that. But they have Tez Johnson back, who looks like he's going to have a 100-catch season. He's like their little slot guy. They added Evan Stewart, former 5-star recruit who transferred from Texas A&M. And then they also have back Trayshawn Holden and Gary Bryant Jr. They lost Troy Franklin, their leading receiver from last year, who I think went in the third round, went to the Denver Broncos, just like Bo Nix did. But that matchup of those receivers against Jordan Hancock, Davis Enigmignosin, and Denzel Burke is awesome, no?
Yeah, I think probably, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say this definitively, but I find it hard to believe that we will see a more compelling receiver versus secondary matchup this season.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then JT Tuimoloau out, Jack Sawyer back as guys who could have gone to the NFL as Ohio State edge rushers against what we talked about on KOTN is, at the very least, the best tackle combo in the North, maybe the best two individual tackles in the North, in a discussion as the best tackle combo in the country, and that's Josh Connolly Jr. at left tackle, who projects as a first-round pick, and a Johnny Cornelius at right tackle. They're both returning starters in a world where a lot of the best tackles in the Big Ten, the two Penn State guys, Taliesin Fuaga from Oregon State, he's not in the Big Ten, but he is in the North, like left. Oregon has their two good tackles from last year back, and I can't wait to see Jack and JT against them.
Yeah, that's at least three. I think I feel comfortable saying like at least 3 first rounders. I don't know if AJ Cornelius is going to be a first round pick, but I think Connerly definitely has a chance to play himself into it, and Jack and JT, I'd be mildly surprised if they weren't. So again, it's another like find me a better matchup. Now you'll get, like, LSU has 2 really good tackles. Like, you'll get some good matchups with those guys. Texas has Kelvin Banks. You'll get some good matchups there in the SEC, but in the North especially, like this is probably as good as it gets when you're talking about edge guys against offensive tackles.
So I do, and Mike had showed the graphic. I'm just intrigued by how both these teams sort of built both sides of the ball. So as we know, the Ohio State defense, 9 starters back. Cody Simon is almost like half a starter. And then they added Caleb Downs, the best safety in the country, as a transfer. So this is 9 returning starters. Cody Simon, who I guess was Tommy Eichenberg's backup last year, but actually might have played better than Tommy Eichenberg, and then Caleb Downs. So that's how this Ohio State defense was built. It's the same defense. Yeah. Adding a 5-star recruit All-American. So like that's what we're talking about here. And this is an important point. Oregon, as smart as Ohio State has been in this offseason in the portal, Oregon is really smart about it as well. Oregon, just like Ohio State, brought in a veteran transfer quarterback, Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. Evan Stewart at receiver, transfer from Texas A&M, and they lost their right guard, and they brought in a transfer from Indiana who's made 38 career starts. They flipped from Colorado. So they have 6 returning starters on offense, 3 transfers, and then 2 backups who were around last year and are ready to step up. One is at center, where they lost Jackson Powers Johnson, who was probably the best center in the country last year, but they have like a pretty good second-year guy who seems ready to go. And then Jordan James at running back, who, as much as everybody loved Bucky Irving, certainly feels like you don't think there's a huge drop-off there, but it's just they're really smart in plugging immediate holes in the transfer portal, and they also have other guys ready.
Yeah, they do. And they're probably more aggressive in the portal than Ohio State is, but they're not like super aggressive, right? They're not bringing in 25, 30 guys to revamp the roster every year. So it is a very similar, I think, philosophy in the way that Oregon wants to build its roster just generally compared to Ohio State's. But in this particular matchup that we're talking about, like there's just more, there's less holes to fill, I think, for Ohio State's defense, because there really aren't any holes to fill for Ohio State's defense coming back this year. And like Oregon, while it has done a nice job of addressing the holes that it had to fill, like we still have to see exactly what that's going to look like.
I totaled everything, and we'll read that now. 22 projected starters for Oregon, 10 returning starters, 5 backups stepping up, and 7 transfers. 7 transfers projected in their starting lineup. Ohio State, 14 starters back, 4 backups stepping up, only 3 transfers, and 1 true freshman in Jeremiah Smith, which will lead us to the flip of this. It's the Ohio State offense versus the Oregon defense. That Ohio State offense, as we know, just like Oregon, brought in the transfer in Will Howard at quarterback, 5 starters back, 3 backups stepping up, 2 transfers in Will Howard and Seth McLaughlin. I didn't include Quinshon Judkins because he's like a co-starter, so I said that was Travion Henderson as a starter, and then 1 true freshman. And then Oregon defensively, they really did. I thought Oregon really had some holes to fill defensively, and this is where they got really aggressive. And I do think in this matchup, the most questionable side of the ball is the Oregon defense. They brought in 4 transfers. They brought in Jamari Caldwell from Houston, who was like the number 2 defensive tackle in the portal. He's going to start on the defensive line. They brought in Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, who made the national title game last year. He's going to be Oregon's best corner. They brought in Cam Alexander, who's also probably going to start at corner. He played at Texas San Antonio last year. And then they brought in Kobe Savage as a safety from Kansas State. You were talking about like they really got aggressive. Only 4 starters back on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's some legitimate questions about Oregon here. They have some guys, but they also had to revamp pretty quickly.
Yeah, and like they got good players, right? Some of the names you're rattling off there are like really solid individual players, but I guess I wonder, like, talent-wise, I don't think they're going to be in a bad spot. I think they're in a rather good spot. But the thing about, if I can like compare it to Ohio State's defense, is the thing that having so many guys back affords you is like you can do a lot. You can get really creative with your defense. And I wonder a little bit whether or not Oregon might be held back from like really unleashing its full defensive potential, just as like they're trying to get, 6 or 7 new guys who haven't really played together, like on the same page. And will they be on the same page by the time this game is played?
Jordan Birch is like their big edge guy back. They were talking a lot in the spring game about like he just sort of needs to take that next step as a pass rusher. Interesting. We believe this is going to be an Ohio State team led by its defense, but I do think the Ohio State offense will have a chance to go to Eugene and move the ball, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like it's not maybe I'll change my mind in October, but like as I look at it right now, I don't see this as like a daunting task in the trenches for Ohio State. Like, yes, there are questions about just how good Ohio State's offensive line can be, and maybe there will be matchups throughout the season that like really worry you. And like this is Oregon on the road, so like that alone is probably enough to worry you. But like just the matchups, like I don't know that I see like an overwhelming advantage there for Oregon. I probably would still give the edge to Ohio State, and like rather comfortably in this particular matchup.
Yeah, which is why we talked about Ohio State defensively versus Oregon offensively is really, I think, what's going to catch people's attention there. But as good as I think Oregon's going to be, they have to figure some stuff out defensively for sure. And they were physical.
They weren't a great defense last year either. Like they were good defense last year. I don't know. Maybe you thought that they didn't have a championship caliber defense last year, like a good. I think
that's. I mean, I think if they had a championship caliber defense, they would have played for the championship.
They would have won.
That's where they fell short. As much as people viewed Washington as a chuck it all over the place kind of offensive team, Washington could put some guys on the field defensively with Braylon Trice and Jabbar Muhammad, and one of their linebackers got drafted. Like they had, I think, more guys. I thought Washington had more guys defensively than Oregon did last year, and I think it showed up.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Like those were like tighter games kind of until Washington figured out a way.
Yeah. All right, so this is returning to the thing that I've said 100 times, which is Ohio State and Oregon could play 3 times this year, which is what you referenced. Texas and Alabama, excuse me, not Texas and Alabama, Texas and Georgia could play 3 times this year. So this is again why I think it's worthwhile Ohio State fans getting to know Oregon a little bit in May, because this is the toughest road game of the regular season for Ohio State. Obviously, it has a chance to be the Big Ten title game, and it very likely could be a playoff semifinal or a national championship game. So Bucks versus Ducks, man, it's kind of where this, as much as like, what's the number one thing for the Ohio State season? Beat Michigan. Okay. Yeah. Obviously. But Bucks versus Ducks, the trilogy, is also on the table.
I would be surprised if we don't see this game at least twice. Where are you on that?
I'm not sure right now. You know, on KOTN, I said Michigan looked better in the spring game than maybe I expected. I was maybe a little out on Michigan as a playoff team. I'm kind of back in on there. You know, Penn State, I think, will be good. You still have to see how the 2 new coordinators at Penn State work out. I don't know what to make of USC in a world where they finally got rid of Alex Grinch as their defensive coordinator. Miller Moss as a quarterback, like, he's not going to be Caleb Williams, but they might be pretty good. So I don't think Ohio State, Oregon in the Big Ten championship game is a slam dunk, but I certainly imagine it will be what I predict.
Yeah, it's what I would predict. I just don't know. Like, I think Michigan will still be good. I think Penn State will be good, but I do feel like there's a fair amount of separation between Ohio State and Oregon and everyone else in the Big Ten.
I think that's right. And if people don't know, like, Washington has lost everybody. Yeah. So Washington's a completely new program right now. So they're not in that mix in the way they would have been a year ago. So just get ready for it, man. And again, this is like with doing Kings of the North, this is what we want you guys to get ready for, which is why we wanted to bring it here to Kings of Columbus. But we're talking about the best Northern games, the best Northern teams. And this is Ohio State, Michigan's its own thing. But in terms of players on the field, high level of competition, we would say Ohio State, Oregon is the best game in the North in 2024. So,
yeah. And I think it's for me too, this conversation it's a lot about this year because that game is going to have so much riding on it, or the games that they play each other will have so much riding on it. But I do feel like now in moving forward into Big Ten without divisions, without Ohio State playing everybody every year other than Michigan, like Oregon is positioned to like really take hold of that like number 2 spot on Ohio State's radar moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're going to dive into another aspect of the Ohio State-Oregon burgeoning rivalry, the recruiting side of things. Birm's going to join us after this on Kings of Columbus. Back on Kings of Columbus, Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis, joined now by the great Jeremy Birmingham. We're going to talk about Ohio State, Oregon recruiting. And in the last 9 years, full 9 years, I did this by including USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA in with the Big Ten schools to say, okay, who would have had the best recruiting class in the Big Ten if those 4 schools had been in the whole time? Mm-hmm. From 2024 to 2015, those 9 years, Ohio State would have had the best recruiting class 7 times. The only 2 times they wouldn't have would have been in 2019 in the Urban Meyer Ryan Day crossover year where Ohio State didn't have a good year. Oregon would have had the best class. And last year, 2024, by the composite ratings, Ohio State 5th overall, Oregon 3rd overall. Overall, in the last 15 years, and I'm including 2025, the class that is being put together right now, top 2 recruiting classes in the Big Ten under these metrics, right? How many are there? Ohio State has 14. USC 7, Michigan 5, Oregon 3, Penn State 1. So again, Oregon, the fact that it had the best class in the Big Ten, if it was a Big Ten school, last year is the big deal. Haven't quite been at the USC level historically. But where things are now, I wanted to lay the groundwork first, right, of what we're talking about when we're talking about Oregon recruiting. Birm. Mm-hmm. How much of a national threat, and we can talk maybe head-to-head later, but do you think Oregon will be putting together recruiting classes that are better or extremely competitive with Ohio State in the world where the Ducks are in the Big Ten?
I think they'll be extremely competitive, as they've proven that already, but they have to do things significantly different than schools like Ohio State do because they don't have a really natural recruiting ground right? So yeah, they can go to California. Yes, they can get up into the Seattle area. They can try to pluck a few of those guys. California has tons of talent, so you do have at least access to that, but it's not the same. It is hard to get to Oregon. It is unwieldy to get to Oregon for recruits. Oregon in the class of 2025, for example, has offered 100 more kids than Ohio State has. Okay, so they're casting a much wider net, and they're much more aggressive in the transfer portal, which is now part of the recruiting rankings. I think their 2024 class with transfers, which they're still trying to add to, like they're still trying to add the Michigan State defensive tackle who's in the portal again, Derek Harmon, for example. He's a guy that they may add. Peyton Woodward, who they may add. We're talking a class of like 40 kids, 40 different people, 40 new players. So I don't know that you can really compare Ohio State's 26 with transfers and all to their 40 and get an apples to apples comparison either way. But top of the board talent is comparable. And then there's a lot of new pieces that they're just trying to put in there. But they recruit well. They have good coaches, young, energetic, a lot of money in the NAL front, Nike, all of the uniform stuff that has made them the most popular program in the country for much of the last decade. All those things are an attempt to mitigate the fact that nobody wants to travel to Oregon because it's terrible to travel there.
They have cliffs there. I think they have lovely cliffs. Don't they have cliffs?
It's a beautiful place.
Side cliffs.
It's beautiful, but it is a B word to get there.
You can walk to Canada from Oregon. That's how far up there it is.
I mean, it's a long walk.
To Oregon? Have you been to Oregon, Birm?
It is closer to, yes, it's closer to walk to Canada from where I live than it is from Oregon. I can assure you that.
Oh, yeah.
That's true.
Toledo has been called the Oregon of the Midwest. Oregon has gotten guys from Southern California, right? Kayvon Thibodeau was from Southern California. It felt like when, what's the guy's name? Who was the coach there? Not Mario Van Peebles. What was the guy's name? He's at Miami now.
Mario Cristobal.
Mario Cristobal. Mario Van Peebles. He's an actor.
Who is Mario Van Peebles?
Mario Van Peebles. He's an actor. Then I think he's a director too. Birm knows who Mario Van Peebles is, right?
Yeah, he's a wonderful actor of the 1980s fame.
Yeah, he'd also be a great.
Oh yeah, that guy. I know that guy.
Yeah, of course you know who Mario Van Peebles is. When Mario Cristobal was there, they were getting some guys out of Southern California. It was also, there was this time like when USC was down, it was like everybody was getting people out of Southern California. Alabama was, and Ohio State was. I'm intrigued, Landis, to see how this works because we had talked in the previous segment about Oregon kind of taking the spot of USC in this Big Ten transition that a lot of people assumed. I'm curious to see how Oregon does in California if USC is back straightened out. Because do you think, Landis, is there room for USC and Oregon to both be awesome? Or is it going to be sort of an either or that, the second one will probably be good, but can they both compete at the top of the Big Ten and compete for playoff spots at the same time?
I think there's probably enough talent in Southern California that they can coexist as playoff contenders. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I also, Birm can tell me if I'm wrong on this. Like, I don't sense that USC has like a ton of recruiting juice. Like, I know they get transfers, but like high school recruiting in Southern California, I think we all just kind of figured it would start to be dominated by USC again once Lincoln Riley got there, and that does not feel like the case for me. It feels like Southern California was opened up during the Clay Helton era at USC, and it kind of still feels open to me. Maybe less so, but I still feel open. And if that is in fact the case, then maybe Oregon stands to benefit from that more than anybody else.
It's not like it's wide open for USC, but they've done a nice job. And Lincoln Riley is a well-known coach. The program, they're in LA. They sell that very well. They've really figured out NIL. So that's on the rise. I mean, they have a class right now that is the number 4 class in the country in the class of 2025. And their top 3 commits are Justice Terry, Julian Lewis, and Isaiah Gibson, 2 defensive linemen and a quarterback. All 3 of them are from Georgia. So like they've actually done a really nice job nationally. But they've done this before, and then they go out and play defense in the season, and then a lot of things fall to the wayside. If you look at, like, again, I'm going to bring up Peyton Woodward, the Alabama signee who's now in the transfer portal and is probably going to end up at Oregon. Like, that's a guy that USC was really believing that they were going to win the battle for last year, and now they're likely to lose it for the fourth time. So there's obviously some disconnect there, but is there a big enough talent pool for Oregon and USC to survive? Absolutely. And thrives? Absolutely. It's the same as Ohio State and Michigan. There's no SEC teams out west. Okay. Like there's no SEC teams that you have to compete with. There's not even like a Notre Dame. There's not a Penn State. There's not all the other things that the Midwest has and the South has, where you have competing conferences and you have competing national powers. You do not have that out west. There's Oregon, there's USC, and then there's everybody from the East and the Southeast trying to pluck one or two of the best players from that region. If you look at Ohio State and Oregon, in Oregon's, again, nearly 40-man roster of new players that's coming in, Ohio State only offered 5 of those high school players that they signed. So it's not, they're going to compete, but I don't think that they're going to like cross over very often. They're going to compete in the macro sense, but not generally in the micro sense, because Oregon doesn't have to recruit the same players Ohio State does, because they can recruit the best of the best from the West Coast, because the Buckeyes are going to try to pluck 2 or 3 guys from out there every year, not 20 or 25.
You don't think adding 2 California schools and 2 Pacific Northwest schools to the Big Ten will substantially change Ohio State's recruiting strategy when it comes to out there? We know CJ Stroud's from California. Wyatt Davis was from California. As you said, they've plucked, but you don't think they'll be heavier in there just because they happen to add a couple of West Coast schools in the conference?
No, I mean, I think that that will be a conversation. I think that you can say to kids, hey, you're going to be on TV. Hey, you'll get a chance to come play at your home every couple of years. But in the big picture of college recruiting, the things that are consistent over the years, like kids want to be close to home. Kids don't travel more than 5 or 6 hours out of their home epicenter if they have the chance to play in that home area. So I don't think you're going to see a huge difference. And the reality is, in the world of transfers and the world of NIL, like, you need more kids in your program that you can trust to stick around for 2 or 3 years. And the more kids you pull from areas unknown and from thousands of miles away, the more likely they are to leave after, 3 months, like, again, Peyton Woodyard did. So I think that that's just a risk that you don't have to take if you're Ohio State. So it has to be a player or two that is exactly what you're looking for, personality wise, their mindset, their mentality, because it takes a special player to decide, I'm going to go to Columbus, Ohio from California to begin with.
Just as we're having this conversation, I just want to top 25 prospects in the state of California last year. UC got 3 and Oregon got 7.
Oh, that feels problematic for Lincoln.
But they fired Alex Grinch. And so this is a huge year for Lincoln Riley. Like, they have to prove to people out west that they can play defense. If you look at guys like Peyton Woodyard, like Kingston Viamuasa, like, those guys did not consider USC because they don't play defense. So if they can prove a little bit that they can play defense, I think you'll see a lot more guys have the desire to stay close to home.
Yeah, like Oregon got Aiden Breland, defensive lineman, Jericho Johnson, defensive lineman, Dakota Fields, cornerback, a linebacker, a safety. They're like all on defense. So
all out of LA generally. So yeah. And then you're going to add Peyton Woodyard to that. So it's a very, very important year for Lincoln Riley's program to put some defense on the field.
So let's talk about 2 aspects then of Oregon's recruiting that's happening now and what's going to happen once they're fully in the Big Ten. You mentioned the staff, Birm, and Bill, you're running down all these defensive players. Dan Lanning's a defensive coach. I don't know, Birm, you think this is a recruiting staff? Now, Ohio State just took their running backs coach, Carlos Lachlan, but is that, you mentioned energy. Do you think Dan Lanning's got something when it comes to recruiting and hiring guys who can recruit?
Yeah, Dan Lanning has juice. I mean, there's no other way to put it, but he also has experience coming from Georgia and the system that they ran. And Kirby Smart learned how to recruit and learned how to recruit from Alabama. And Dan Lanning has learned how to recruit from Georgia. It works. They know how to sell kids on what they're doing. They have a very aggressive NIL stance. And of course, having Phil Knight and Nike in the backyard and being an integral part of those conversations is a wild card, an ace in the hole that most schools in the country have nowhere close to. But I don't think, like, if you look at Oregon staff, I don't think you look at them and go, yes, elite recruiter, elite recruiter, elite recruiter. It's just like, this is a solid group. Dan Lanning is young. He's energetic. He's got a lot of juice to him. And then you throw in all the other things that they have, and it makes it an easy call for a lot of kids out in the West Coast.
It's like Dan Lanning is like Nick Saban's grandson in this, because Kirby Smart is Nick Saban's son in recruiting, and then Dan Lanning got it from Kirby, which is why Dan Lanning can go back and take over for Grandpa's program when Kalen DeBoer doesn't work out at Alabama. The other part of this, as Birm just mentioned, Bill, is this NIL thing. I don't remember what show it was that I had a couple of years ago when the NIL stuff was first starting. I was talking to an Oregon reporter, and we ended up basically in a screaming match on a podcast because I was making the point that Oregon's going to kill it in NIL, and he was like, "It's no different than anywhere else," basically, and I. There's a Nike factory in the backyard. Phil Knight's going to be sprinkling money all over the place.
Yeah.
Isn't that a huge part of this too? That in this world, the way this world is currently structured, it feels like Oregon has an advantage almost over anybody when it comes to an NIL fountain.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a logical assumption. I have found myself questioning that too, only because like Nike is also in the Ohio State business. So like I does it make sense for Phil Knight to funnel money into the Oregon football program to pay players, and while he has, I don't know, how X amount of other college football brands that probably make him more money than Oregon does? Like, I don't know. I guess if you're 86 years old and you think you're not going to be around very long and you want your alma mater to win a national title, then maybe that takes precedent. But I have felt at times like the Oregon Nike connection maybe has been a little overstated, but there's no question that Oregon is well funded, wherever it's coming from. I just don't know if it's like coming out of Phil's pockets or not.
I think that if Ohio State and other schools around the country that wear Nike on their chest went to Phil Knight and said, "Hey, just so you know, you guys got to stay out of this NIL stuff, or we're going to go take our business elsewhere," maybe then Oregon would that maybe it wouldn't matter. But right now, like, that's still Phil Knight's school. And a lot of schools around the country have big companies and multi-billion-dollar companies in their cities. Not many of them have multi-billion-dollar companies that are sports companies that are like built on the backs of athletes. Like it is a different impact. Like if Ohio State can bring kids to Columbus and take them to the limited and be like, "Oh, here's the those kids don't care.
You want some jeans?" Yeah,
right. You take a kid to Nike. And the owner of Nike walks into the building, it changes things.
Yeah, no, that's probably true.
You guys saw that Matt Damon, Ben Affleck movie, right? Like Ben Affleck, he's Phil
Good
Knight.
one.
Phil Knight had like a waffle iron he was standing on the cliffs of Oregon looking out over the Pacific Ocean, and he took a waffle iron and some rubber and he made a shoe.
Yeah.
And that's why he loves Oregon. So like, you can't compete with that.
The original line from Good Will Hunting was, "How do you like those waffles?" And they changed.
How do you like those rubber waffles?
Yeah.
Birm, is Oregon here? It's been, I guess Oregon has been here to stay. It's sort of like a Chip Kelly created the modern Oregon with the uniforms and the up-tempo offense. And again, the Oregon team that Ohio State faced in the Rose Bowl after the 2009 season, that version of Oregon felt new and fresh and different. And then he left, and Mark Helfrich still managed to like make a national title game on the fumes of Chip Kelly. And then they were okay, but got lost in the wilderness a little bit. And now it feels like they're back. Do you think, from a recruiting and football and resources standpoint, in this new modern world of college football, is Oregon here to stay as a potential national power? Or do you think like this is a lot of Dan Lanning juice, and if he takes his juice to Alabama, they could fall off?
I think it's more A than B, but I don't discount B. And I do think that having the right coach who comes from a system that is successful and he knows how to implement it. Like there are a lot of coaches who leave successful programs and try to implement the same program elsewhere. Chris Ash or pick anyone, and it doesn't work.
Stray, my gosh.
I'm saying like Rutgers emulated everything Ohio State did, but it didn't matter because they were still Rutgers. Oregon is a program that people like to watch, and there's a lot of things about it that draws the attention of people. I think Oregon's here to stay. I think Dan Lanning is going to be at Oregon for a long time because, I mean, now we can debate whether or not he actually turned down the Alabama job this offseason or not, or if that was just all, bluster on agents' parts, but he was definitely in the mix for that job, or at least in the conversation for it. And I don't know that there's many jobs around the country that are going to be able to lure him away from what Oregon can offer. And so as a really young head coach, going to be there a long time, I think that they are definitely going to be around to stay.
I just looked up. I don't know where Chris Ash is currently employed at the moment. He was the defensive backs coach for the Raiders last year, but he got washed out when they fired Josh McDaniels. So
he just felt a chill go down his spine wherever he is. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be it's the evidence is there for all over the country. People try to emulate where they've been, but if you don't have the right guy leading the charge, it doesn't matter.
It's a fascinating discussion because you're exactly right that it felt like a photocopy. And I mean, I think he literally photocopied like the Urban Meyer handbook of like how to be a head coach, but you can't be a photocopy of somebody else and succeed. You have to take things. It's the difference between, do people watching the show know what an encyclopedia is? Like when you had a report in middle school and you just copied out of the encyclopedia and your teacher said, that's not a report. You can't just go word for word from the encyclopedia. Yeah. You must take in the information and synthesize it and then put it in your own words. Sometimes, Birm, coaches are just copying out of the encyclopedia.
I mean, there were literally the same signs in the locker room at Rutgers as there were at Ohio State. It was bizarre. But it was also the same case. Tom Herman did the same thing at Texas, took a lot of the same verbiage and a lot of the same ideas and didn't work there either. And now you see what Steve Sarkisian, he's been able to take what he learned at Alabama and implement it there. It's about having the right guy leading it and not necessarily anything else. And I do think that Dan Lanning is the right guy leading it. I think Oregon understands that there are programs that I think that they understand their place pretty well right now. If you look at what they did on the recruiting trail in the last year, they didn't really go head to head with Ohio State. They went after Jeremiah McClellan, who was Ohio State's wide receiver number 3 in their 2024 class for months, plucked him from the Buckeyes on signing day, essentially telling him, hey, they're not really giving you anything. You're the 3rd wide receiver. You can come here. We'll throw a lot more NIL your way, and you'll be our top guy. Easy. If you look at the guys that they're really trying to recruit against Ohio State in this cycle, they're going after Justin Hill in the state of Ohio, Trey McNutt in the state of Ohio, players at Ohio State would probably think that they would get a hometown discount on. And you see Oregon going at those guys aggressively. Blake Woodby, Ohio State's 3rd cornerback commit in the class of 2025, who is the number 3 corner behind the number 1 and number 2 ranked corners in the country, who are both committed to Ohio State. That's an easy guy to start pulling at the threads and say, you know what? You're not really valued there. They're spending all of their NIL money on these other 2 guys. You're not going to get the attention you deserve there. Come out here. Fahim Delane in Baltimore, another guy Ohio State is very involved in. Oregon was the team that was most recruiting Devin Sanchez. Like, they're plucking at Ohio State. And I think they do that as opposed to going after Georgia. Maybe it's a respect thing from Kirby Smart, from Dan Lanning. I don't know. But maybe it's understanding that Ohio State, for the most part, for 98% of the cycle anyway, seems to be hell-bent on making sure they still stay above board, whatever the board is, and no matter how much the board is sinking, Ohio State is actively and aggressively attempting to stay above it. And I don't know that it's a time or place where anyone in college football should be so respectful of that board, but the teams that are willing to say, hey, we're gonna undercut you, and they'll do it. And Oregon's certainly doing that, and to their credit, they should.
Jeremiah McClellan did have a catch in the spring game, by the way. He's probably like wide receiver 6 on that team right now. But Bill, it's a great point that Birm makes. Even if Oregon makes Ohio State work harder or raises the cost of doing business for Ohio State, Oregon could have an impact on Ohio State, even if they're not directly winning head-to-head battles. It's one of these things. For many years, and the way Michigan's played recently, I think that conversation's over. But when Ohio State was just absolutely dominating the Big Ten and nobody could challenge them, it's like, what are we doing here? You're adding another incredibly credible challenger to the conference, both on the field and in recruiting. And at the very least, Bill, it's gonna it's going to raise the stakes and, keep Ohio State honest.
Yeah, it keep honest, I think, is the right way to put it. And it's something that it's a little different now, I think, because like Michigan is a better program. But my earlier time covering Ohio State, I was always surprised at how little like Michigan seemed to bother to make Ohio State work in recruiting. It just sort of like always threw its hands up and just accepted its fate that it wasn't going to beat Ohio State for recruits, which was probably true. But I still think you got to take your swings every now and then. And Oregon doesn't seem to hesitate at all to take those swings. So that does change the dynamic a little bit for Ohio State. Like I don't know. I'd probably still take Ohio State more often than not against Oregon in a head-to-head recruiting battle, but Oregon is resourced enough that it's probably worth coming to grips with the idea that Oregon's going to beat Ohio State for some guys because Oregon is pretty aggressive.
Yeah, I mean Michigan, especially in the early part of the Jim Harbaugh era, like Brady Hoke tried to make some inroads in Ohio, and then everything collapsed under him. When Jim Harbaugh took over, they didn't try to recruit Ohio for like 4 years. And they're like, screw it, we're not even going to bother with it. And then in the class, 2020, 2021, after like they were waiting to win a game, and then all of a sudden they're back in Ohio in full force. Last year they signed, I think, 4 guys from Ohio. Only one had an Ohio State offer, but you can still. Those are the guys that they built a program on for decades in Ann Arbor. So like that's what the recipe still is. With Oregon, it's the Jordan Davison. So Ohio State and Oregon, that's probably the top 2 for Jordan Davison. Rivals.com has him as the number 1 ranked running back in the country. It's Ohio State versus Oregon. Ohio State versus Oregon for Bo Jackson out of Cleveland, Ohio, another running back. It's Ohio State, Oregon, probably for De'Aaron Hill, a running back from Illinois, who Carlos Lachlan was very, very involved with. Offered him the first day he was on the job at Ohio State. De'Aaron Hill visited Oregon this past weekend, is probably going to end up committing there, even with Lachlan gone. So like it is going to be some head-to-head stuff, but it's not often going to be. Again, I like to consider it's almost like parallel paths. Like they're going to both be top probably 3 or 4 teams in the country every single year in recruiting, but I don't think that they're going to cross streams very often. When they do, though, it's going to be for those elite of elite guys that Ohio State. As long as you win half of those, then that's all you need to do, because generally speaking, the half you lose is going to be from out west, and you're going to have a backup plan closer to home anyway.
Birm, Doug asked you this earlier about maybe Ohio State being a little more aggressive out west with the expanded Big Ten footprint. And I think a lot of us have wondered, like, if that would benefit anybody. Like, would it open doors for Midwest teams to go out west, or for West Coast teams to come here? Oregon's presence in Ohio in this cycle, is that a byproduct of them like trying to take advantage of an expanded Big Ten footprint? Is there something specific about this particular crop of 2025 prospects that has allowed Oregon to get inroads in Ohio, or are they just they're not afraid to go anywhere? They'll go where the players are.
I think it's partly a little bit of like, yeah, you're going to be playing in the Midwest. You may as well recruit the Midwest. You're going to be around. I think that it's more of the fact that they saw the recipe that worked with Jeremiah McClellan, which is Ohio State is not going to pay you as much as other schools will pay you, and we will go over the top of what even we would normally pay you in order to win that recruiting battle to get into those conversations. If you look at a guy like Justin Hill, it's a very different reality. I think Justin Hill is a edge 3-4 outside linebacker type, and like Ohio State doesn't play a 3-4, so Oregon does. So that's they're going to try and pluck. I keep saying pluck because I've taken of feathers and ducks, but like they're going to see that there's an angle there, and then you add that to you're also a hometown kid. Ohio State's going to look for a discount, and we're not. And I think all those things play into it. A lot of the kids from Ohio, like who are national level recruits, they are turned off by the notion that they are expected to go to Ohio State. And I think that in some ways they really enjoy getting this opportunity to see other parts of the country. Most of the time, they're still going to end up committing to Ohio State, however. And so I don't know exactly how much of that investment is really worth it for Oregon. But if you get one guy a year that Ohio State wants in the Midwest, then it's something you can hold over their head. And then you look back and you say, hey, last time we played them, we out physicaled them. We showed, Oregon showed Michigan the recipe for how to beat Ohio State in the last 3 years. And so if that continues and Ohio State struggles with their physicality again this year, conversations change based on what people see on the field. And right now, all they're trying to do is be involved in the conversation. And they are.
We'll get you out of here on this one, Birm. You're talking about Oregon coming into Ohio. Is there anything to the idea of Ohio State going to the Pacific Northwest just to make Oregon play a little defense in its own backyard? We know they got JT Tuimoloau and Emeka Egbuka out of Washington a couple years ago. Like, is that if Oregon's going to come into Ohio, do you need to go in their territory as well?
I mean, if there's players up there that are good enough, I don't see Oregon offering a lot of guys from Oregon. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. There's not a lot of like high level football talent in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of those guys end up playing basketball. A lot of those guys are sticking at Washington. I haven't looked at it, to be honest. If I went through the state of Oregon's top talent right now, I'm going to use the 247 Oregon rankings. I don't think that there's going to be a player on here that Ohio State has offered.
I have it up right here. There's only one 4-star prospect.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not an area that you're going to go. It's that player is a tight end. Ohio State has their tight end committed. Like, there's not anybody on this list that you look at and like, oh, that's. There's one of the top 20 players, 15 players in Oregon is committed, and he's committed to Washington State. Like, it's not an area that opens itself up to really just go in there and start pulling on their strings just to piss them off or to get them to defend their home turf. And that's, I guess, in some ways, maybe the benefit Oregon has, because they can go to California. USC can't recruit all 150 4-star players in the state of California. And Ohio State can pretty much recruit all of the top 10 players in Ohio. So it's much easier for Oregon to stay out west. And I think they should stay there forever.
I feel like the way to stick it to Oregon is just like to go recruit modern day and not go recruit the state of Oregon. Just go to LA and Southern California.
Well, that's why the potential for landing someone like Jordan Davison, the running back at Mater Dei, Ohio State has tried for half a decade now to win a battle there, and they're this close to winning the Jordan Davison one. Chris Henry Jr. is now at Mater Dei High School in California. Ohio State obviously is the commit. He's committed to the Buckeyes, and if they can start to open up that pipeline, that is a really good way to send a shot to Oregon and say, hey, you guys stay out here and leave Justin Hill and Trey McNutt alone.
I love recruiting wars. It really is. It's like a military battle. You got to open another front, make them defend their turf. All right. He's Jeremy Birmingham.
I'm going to say this one before I go. It's one thing Urban Meyer was great at, understanding which fronts were fertile and open. Georgia was having down years. They went into Georgia. Tennessee was down. They went into Tennessee. Florida was down. They went to Florida. Texas sucked. They went into Texas. Like, they have understood when and where to go get guys. And NIL, if it's leveled the field in one specific area, it's that those programs, even Texas A&M, who continues to be a dumpster fire on the field, they are able to mitigate a lot of that negativity by just saying, yeah, but this year we're going to spend more. We're going to be better. And so there's the gates are up, and those gates are made of nothing but cash.
Oh, yeah, that's tough. So you think it makes it, the NIL world makes it easier for kids to stay closer to home because there are kids leaving Texas and kids leaving Southern California and places like that because they felt like I can't compete for a national title in my backyard, so I'm going to have to go somewhere else. But now, at least if there's money in my backyard, there's a reason to stay. And so it's harder to go recruit nationally out of your area because you started this conversation off by saying most kids want to stay within a 5 or 6 hour radius anyway, and the money makes it easier.
100%. Way easier to stay home.
He's Jeremy Birmingham. You can hear him all the time here on the podcast, and you can read him at Dotting the I's on our rival site. Jeremy Birmingham, thanks so much for joining us here on Kings of Columbus.
I'm glad to do it. Thanks, guys. See you. Bye.
We'll be back with a little more Ohio State talk after this. Doug and Bill back. Thanks again to Birm for taking time out of his day. Bill, we want to talk a little bit about Ohio State and the transfer portal. And the math is this, right? Since the end of the season, Ohio State's lost 20 guys or something in the portal. Mm-hmm. And they've added 6. In this window, in this spring window, this April window, they've lost 6 and they've added 0 so far. Although, again, as people understand this, the deadline was April 30th to like go in the portal, but there still could be paperwork that comes out. So you still could hear about a couple guys going in, but it's not a deadline to like find a new home. So Ohio State could still land some guys. I think the main thing here, Bill, is Ohio State got through this cycle, spring, but also I think the entire cycle of this offseason without losing anybody they didn't want to lose, or that was really a body blow to the program. And whenever you're doing transfer portal math, I mean, we're in a world where the 6 that came in for Ohio State, Caleb Downs and Julian Sand from Alabama, Will Howard as the probable starting quarterback, Quinshon Judkins as a number 1 running back, Will Kazmarek as a possible starting tight end, and Seth McLaughlin as a possible starting center. The impact of those 6 dwarfs the impact of losing the 18 to 20 guys. So I do think sometimes the portal numbers matter, but it's actually about impact. And for Ohio State, this portal season, since the Michigan loss, is an absolute plus.
It is. I'm trying to remember the first one though. Like at the moment, like you'd like to have Noah Rogers around. Like I think Noah Rogers is a bright future receiver. Maybe you like to have Kai Stokes around in the world where you're hurting a little bit for safety depth. But aside from that, like I don't know, nothing too crazy there. And then like Dallin Hayden obviously would be nice to have around too as running back depth. But again, it's like, what's the worst thing that happened to you in terms of player losses in the transfer portal? It's like, oh, we lost our 3rd string running back. It's like, oh, okay. Well, I think you're doing okay. And then they added impactful starters. I think they didn't even, it was even like adding like a Vic Cutler last year where it's like, that guy's not going to play here. Like the best possible case is that guy's like depth for you. Like they didn't really do anything like that. And this, like every addition they made mattered tremendously, and all of their losses, I think, can be dealt with.
So let's talk about 3 guys who didn't transfer, which is like, hey, let's talk about the transfer portal and what didn't happen. As we sit here, and again, I think we all have to get used to this. The idea of people talking about something at a show, and then by the time you watch it, it's no longer true, especially as it relates to the transfer portal. As we speak, Lincoln Kienholz is still an Ohio State Buckeye. They kept the 5 quarterbacks they have. This constant conversation, if Devin Brown and Will Howard are still fighting for that job and it isn't 100% decided, it absolutely makes sense for both of them to be here. And it absolutely makes sense for Air Noland and Julian Sand as true freshmen. They're not demanding to go start as true freshmen. Be here, fight it out, position yourself for the future, learn, be in a good room with Chip Kelly and a bunch of veteran guys. Like, why would either of them go anywhere? And Lincoln Kienholz is right in the middle. And the idea, do you think Lincoln Kienholz could go start somewhere in 2024 if he wanted to?
Yeah, like not at like a high level Power 4 program. I don't think like there was a time where people were throwing around the rumor that like Lincoln Kienholz is going to transfer to Iowa. Like I don't know how effective of a starting quarterback Lincoln Kienholz could be this year for Iowa. But like if he wanted to go to, I don't know, Wyoming, yeah, I think he could be a pretty effective starting quarterback there this year.
So if you're not gonna be a starter in the Power 4, then does another year at Ohio State, learn, be in the mix, and then when you leave, if you do leave, or maybe you stay here and win the job, who knows? But if he would decide to leave eventually, you leave to start. You leave on the Joe Burrow plan. Does that just make more sense in the portal world to you?
It makes more sense to me, yeah. Like, and like, it's easy for me to say that because like I'm not in it, right? But like me as someone who's not a quarterback being courted by teams, I think it makes more sense to develop at a place like Ohio State, be maybe the 3rd quarterback this year. I guess that's the other part of the question. It's like how sure of your standing if you're Lincoln Kienholz? Because I think everyone agrees that the starting quarterback is Will Howard. Most people would probably say the 2nd string quarterback is Devin Brown, but I think there's enough curiosity about Julian Sand whether he could be QB2, QB3, and then what does that mean for Lincoln Keenholz? So that like changes the calculus a little bit, I think, if you're Lincoln. But generally, I think I would rather maybe wait one more year, especially when you have 4 years of eligibility left. Let's like stay in the quarterback incubator at Ohio State, maybe be QB3 behind like one guy who's not been able to stay healthy, and then see where that leaves you after 2024. I think like that's a reasonable decision, I think.
I don't think Jack Miller's a terrible comparison in this discussion. 2 years at Ohio State, transferred to Florida for the 2022 season, didn't play, then did start at Florida in the bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2023, didn't play at all. Like Graham Mertz came and won that job. And I guess, when he went to Florida, right, Anthony Richardson was still there when he got there. And it's like, well, you're not going to play ahead of Anthony Richardson, but then maybe you think you're setting yourself up for the future. But if you're going to be a backup at Ohio State. Like, is that a t-shirt? Is that a t-shirt in the quarterback room? If you can't, if you're not ready to start here, if you're blocked, whatever, but you are ready to be a starter, we will help you. We will talk to schools. We will send you off. But if you're not that, why sit somewhere else? Which I feels like what Ryan Day has been saying since the jump with the Joe Burrow thing. Like, Joe Burrow was ready to be a starter. He wasn't going to be the starter at Ohio State, so he left. But he stayed and soaked everything up in the meantime. It still, I think, even in this portal world, remains a pretty compelling pitch.
No, I think so too. And I think that for a kid like Lincoln Keenholz, who played high school football in South Dakota, was a 3-sport athlete, so like he wasn't an all-year football guy. He didn't enroll early at Ohio State, so like this was his first spring practice. Like, he is still very early in his development. And maybe, he probably has a pretty high opinion of himself. I wouldn't. He's a talented athlete. But like deep down, or like in the back of your mind somewhere, like if you truly know, like, I'm not quite ready yet. I would almost rather like not be overexposed, right? Like not go somewhere and start when I'm not ready and then like, thwart my development in some way. Because we've seen that happen to plenty of quarterbacks. So like I no better place to be a backup than the Ohio State quarterback room, I think, is a t-shirt that I would be selling. Yeah.
The other two guys that to me were just like not on the radar of anything you heard about, but just on the radar of I'm looking at the depth chart. You think about their age, you think about their opportunity. The idea that Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry entering their third college football seasons as defensive ends, still behind JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, because both those guys stayed. As soon as Sawyer and Tuimoloau stayed, I was like, well, I've been waiting for the Kenyatta Jackson thing to pop for 2 years. I had almost come to grips with the idea that that would be the cost of doing business. In keeping JT and Jack, that's how this works. This is a third-year guy, and they're still here. That's good news for Ohio State, yes?
It's great news for Ohio State because that is not a particularly deep room. Yeah. I think they do have 8 ends, but there's a couple of freshmen in there. And one of them is Mitchell Melton, who like looks like he can be a good player, but is also like never really played. So they needed those guys to stay. I wonder, like I haven't talked to anybody about this. I wonder if there were some reassurances to both those guys, Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, like you're going to play more this year. And that's part of like we're might play 16, 17 games. We're going to need to play depth stuff, even if, and I know you laid out some numbers a couple weeks ago about like how maybe that's overstated a little bit, but it seems like it's a pretty compelling sales pitch for Ohio State right now, which helped them keep this roster together. And like, and they need to, I think they need to adjust the way they play the defensive line. Like I think that they probably played their main guys too much last year. So if they can balance that a little bit, then that means more snaps for Kenyatta and Caden Curry. And if they got on board with that, then great. Cause Ohio State very much needed them. If they lost either one of those guys, it's not even about like projecting what they could be as players. And I think there's reason to be high on both of them. It's just like sheer number of bodies who can play defensive end. They would be pretty light if they lost either one of them.
It's pretty amazing to have 9 defensive starters returning and to not have lost more of the next guys up. So like, they lose Amori Abor, they lost Cedric Hawkins, they lost, you mentioned Kai Stokes. Like Kai Stokes probably stands out as the guy they would probably be, near the top of the twos when it comes to safety. But I hate, these are people's lives, right? To speculate about, but the kind of thing that would hurt is if CJ Hicks said, okay, what are we doing? I'm a 5-star recruit. I'm entering year 3. I think I might be the best defensive player at Illinois the minute I stepped on campus. I might be the best defensive player at Wisconsin the minute I stepped on campus. And we're talking about how CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles are maybe going to share a spot, and I haven't gotten to play at all yet. What are we doing?
Mhm.
That's the kind of thing, like if that happened, you couldn't have been shocked by that, but those feel like those aren't the things that are happening at Ohio State in the portal that often. They're not losing the guys that would make the coaching staff and or the fans go, oh, I can't believe that guy's leaving. How many ohs have there been in this cycle? CJ Hicks would have been, Kenyatta. I would have gone, my Kenyatta Jackson left. That's not where they are.
I think Dallin Hayden probably rose to that level. Just because I think the fan base really liked him and like sort of felt bad for the way that he was handled here too, with the red shirt stuff and like just not playing really at all last year. But aside from him, like that feeling would be more born out of like, losing a former 5-star prospect like Noah Rogers, right? Not necessarily a guy that had shown you a lot to tell you that he was definitely going to be a part of the plan moving forward, just like a young player you're excited about. But like, I don't know that they have really had anybody like that other than Dallin.
I mean, and that's what happens at some schools. If Jermaine Matthews walked in and said, I'm going to be the number 1 corner at Tennessee, see ya.
Well, that's what you worry about. Yeah, like Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt, right? Who both look like they're ready to roll, but neither of whom are probably going to start this year, and who knows how much they might play. It's like they could go start for probably just about anybody else, especially
for
Jermaine.
A playoff team.
Yeah, especially Jermaine Matthews.
So, and again, like I'm not saying that person should do that, but that's where the portal world has put people on edge.
Mm-hmm.
That because every piece is connected. And Jordan Hancock stayed. Woohoo! Who's going to leave? And to have all those guys stay and not have a commensurate equal number of second team guys leave is a great transfer outcome for Ohio State. I think because and everything in the portal, and maybe we'll try to do this on KOTN and like assign grades somehow. We're going to run through on our Thursday Kings of the North. We'll be looking at all the portal ins and outs for the teams in the North, but you have to look at them together. You can't only, because there was a time like a bunch of guys left right when the season ended and people were like, yeah, man, everybody's leaving Ohio State. And it's like, you would trade 14 of those guys for half of Caleb Downs. What are you talking about? The portal is working for Ohio State. You must speak about them together, and there's zero doubt that Ohio State has come out a winner in this overall portal cycle with the ins and the outs.
Yeah, they definitely have. The only other thing I guess I would want to mention is like, it's not, we talked about this on the daily, like it's not surprising to me that they didn't add anybody in the second window, but like I wasn't alert for an offensive lineman. I just don't think that one worth going after ever was there. So like the players have to be there for you to go after, and I just don't think they were.
And we will remain on alert. As we said, like the window is closed for filing paperwork, but there may be paperwork to become public of outs that is not yet known. And there certainly could still be more ins because guys can still be making decisions. You know, the Rutgers guy who was competing to be a starting quarterback just went in the portal, like announced it today, right? Gavin Wimsatt. Like that's the idea. So again, this is,
and graduates too. Graduates aren't beholden to the April 30th deadline.
Congratulations on people for graduating. That's nice.
Yeah.
Get your degree and you're just free. All right.
That's right.
What you watching, what you eating, what you thinking. We'll wrap up this version of Kings of Columbus with that. Bill Landis, what have you been watching?
So I think all three of these for me will be tied to the vacation I just took, but we were out in California last week. So I had a couple of long flights on which I watched a few movies. So I watched American Fiction on one flight, and I watched The Holdovers. I watched American Fiction on the way out and The Holdovers on the way back.
Which did you like better?
The Holdovers by a mile.
You didn't like American Fiction?
No, I thought American Fiction was like very well acted. I thought the story
Love Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah, Jeffrey Wright was great. I thought the story sucked.
Sterling K. Brown
was excellent. Yeah. What's the girl's name from Blackish? Tracy Ellis Ross.
Oh
no, Tracy.
Tracy Ellis Ross. Yeah.
But I'm actually surprised. Like Issa Rae's, from like the trailer, I expected Issa Rae's role to be like more prominent, and it wasn't.
Yeah. So without giving American Fiction away, I enjoyed it, and then I thought the movie completely undermined itself in an
With the
unnecessary way. Yeah, at the end,
yeah,
in a way that like almost made me want to sit down with the writer director and be like, because that guy won Best Screenplay at the Oscars,
I know.
Cord Jefferson, and be like, why did you do that? Like, why did you? Like, is that what, or did you not like it all the way along? Because I liked the first 70 minutes.
No, well, it was like the final straw for me. Certainly was like the way that it ended, but like the whole conceit just felt like sort of illogical to me. And like again, I don't want to give too much away for people who haven't seen it. And I guess like if you haven't seen it and you want to, you can stop listening to me for a second. But like the reason for Jeffrey Wright's character like doing what he did like seemed unnecessary because like they were clearly a very wealthy family and owned 2 homes. And it's just like this doesn't really sync up for me. So that was a little hard to wrap my mind around.
That is a little hard. It's like, here's our beleaguered character going to his beach house.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
I would love to be beleaguered at the beach.
Yeah. And they pay for live-in help. Like they clearly have money.
Yeah. And holdovers, you like the holdovers.
I love the holdovers. Yeah. I like Paul Giamatti too. So it's going to be difficult for me to not like anything that Paul Giamatti's in. But the actress in that, whose name I can't remember, she won like Best Supporting Actress, right?
She did.
Yeah, she was incredible. Like a really kind of like heartbreaking character. But I just really enjoyed it. I don't know. I know maybe it's because I have an East Coast Catholic private school education. It resonated with me. Not that I didn't go to like a fancy boarding school, but I took Latin in high school. So
Philly Billy at a boarding school is a sitcom waiting to happen.
I don't think I would. I wasn't cut out for it. I don't think.
No, that's why it'd be a great show.
Yeah,
you'd be just like.
But you saw both those movies?
I did. I saw them like purposefully.
Yeah.
Really, I saw American Fiction in the theaters. Like, really wanted to see American Fiction, and then watched the holdovers like right before the Oscars because it was like, oh, this woman's going to win Best Supporting Actress. We should watch this. I actually got Peacock to watch the holdovers.
Nice.
And then I got to watch the Notre Dame spring game because I still had it because it was one of those things where it was going to cost $4 to rent the holdovers or cost $4 to get Peacock for a month. And then I was like, oh, I need this spring game. I need to watch the Notre Dame spring game. My wife was like, we still have the Peacock. I was like, yes, thank you, holdovers.
Nice. But you like American Fiction more?
It is one of the contrast to me. I can't remember a movie that I enjoyed as much for 85% of it and felt as undercut by the last 15% as that movie. So for me, I would say it was an enjoyable experience, but then when I walked out, I wasn't happy. But I was happy during it for most of it. And then I was like, why did you do that? So
yeah. And like the holdovers was good, but like it's also like it's familiar. Like we've seen like combative student teacher boarding school relationship turns into something lovely like a couple of times. So
yeah. I really think it's not too late for you to go to boarding school. Just tell your wife I'm going to go for like 3 months just for a social experiment for the show.
Yeah.
All right, so I half watched, and this happens, right? Your wife is watching something. She's like, hey, you want to watch this? I was like, no. And then she's watching it, and you're like, wander into the room. So it was this Bon Jovi documentary that's out.
Oh, I wanted to watch that.
Jovi. I was like, I'm good on Bon Jovi. I'll sing. My favorite thing about March Madness is when college basketball pep bands play Living on a Prayer. But I don't need to watch 4 hours of John Bon Jovi. And my wife thinks John Bon Jovi is the most handsome person on the planet. My wife gasped. The way I would gasp if Kenyatta Jackson went in the transfer portal is the way my wife gasped every time they showed a picture of John Bon Jovi from 1987. She was like, oh. And I was like, what's wrong? She's like, he's so handsome. So that was fun. That's a great watch with your wife. He's so handsome. But when I worked in Wilmington, Delaware, I actually did moderate beat coverage of the Arena Football League and the Philadelphia Soul. Co-owned by Ron Jaworski and John Bon Jovi. So I've talked to John Bon Jovi multiple times, which I reminded my wife of. And she was like, oh, you talked to John Bon Jovi? It was fine. I wanted to learn how they wrote Living on a Prayer or whatever. But there was a lot of John Bon Jovi being like, it's a burden, but I am Mick Jagger and Bruce Springsteen. I'm the perfect mix of the two of them. And I've just had to live with it. And I've had to carry this band as one of the great frontmen in the history of rock and roll. And I am willing to carry that burden. It was kind of that for 4 hours. And it's a little bit like Deion Sanders. I want to like you, but like 25% just pull back. You are very good.
Yeah.
But you're not John Lennon, so maybe let's not pretend this is a Beatles documentary. He was like,
Yeah.
We were trying to make the cover of Slippery When Wet. And we had a woman in a slippery when wet t-shirt on the cover. And the record company wouldn't allow it. And it's like, this is not the same as like when the Beatles went to India or whatever, right? It's not, oh man. The Slippery When Wet t-shirt cover, one of the great travesties in rock and roll history. So it was fine. But my wife was a little too enamored. He's like 63. He still looks good though.
Yeah, he looks pretty good. I didn't know a lot
of hair tips from him.
So I did not watch that documentary, but he was on the Smart List podcast with Jason Bateman and Willard like a week ago, I guess maybe promoting this. And I didn't know he's had like severe like vocal cord issues. Like he hasn't been able to sing for a couple of years. Yeah. Or sing like the way he wants to anyway. That has to suck. I don't like.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean that does suck. But anyway, all right. What are you eating? Did you eat some good California stuff? Did you eat some avocados?
Yeah, I got some avocados in. Had some good breakfast stops on our trip, but surprisingly, the best thing I ate when we were out there was when we were at Disneyland and we went to like a food court in the Star Wars area, and I got these fried chicken bao buns. They were incredible. It's like one of the best things I've had to eat like in the last 5 years.
They are tremendous.
Yeah.
You've had Disneyland. I just thought you were going to California.
We just went to Disneyland just for the day. Yeah. Yeah.
I've had those bao buns. They don't have them in Florida. They only have them in Disneyland in California. They are delicious.
They're so good. I was starving. I was like, I'll eat anything. I was like, give me the bao buns, whatever. I'll eat. I know what those are. I'll eat them. And then they came over and I housed them in 30 seconds. Like, this is the best thing I've ever had in my life.
You know about bao buns because I made you and Ari eat fast casual bao buns in Chicago.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Oh.
At what's the place called?
Wow Bao.
Wow Bao. Yeah. Does that still exist?
Oh yeah, they've expanded.
Okay.
They have like Wow Bao ghost kitchens in Ohio. They don't have a full restaurant, but
nice.
You can get it. They have them in the grocery store. They have Wow Bao buns in the grocery store now. Oh, I'm so happy that you went to Disneyland and that you ate a Wow Bao. Like we ate a bao bun in Disneyland. Did your family and your child enjoy Disneyland?
They did. That was actually part of my what I'm thinking thing. So I was going to save it, but I can talk about it. If you want to. Okay.
I feel like I should skip my stuff now if we're going to talk about Disneyland. All right, my eating is that I have reached the point in my old age where I kind of have to watch my salt intake, and so there's salt in everything. Oh my god, sodium. It's just every restaurant thing and prepackaged thing is like 14 times your daily allowance of sodium. So my eyes have been opened to sodium intake. And so I'm realizing that pizza is going to be a less regular part of my life, I think, than it has been in the past. But my Instagram algorithm has noticed me clicking on delicious videos of New York style pizza. And so my Instagram has risen up to replace my actual pizza intake. And I just am flooded with beautiful videos of, and I don't know if it's just me or if everybody agrees what beautiful pizza is. It's not square cut. It's not little tiny thin crust. It is beautiful New York style with the crispy little bit blackened crust and the nice brown cheese and the fold. And I can almost taste the videos and it's satiating my desire to go shove an entire pizza in my face because I'm maybe past that point in my life. But man, pizza videos. I talked about gambling videos. I don't gamble as much as I used to. And now the pizza videos are getting done for me.
You got to get into the message group with me and Ari on Instagram because that's all it is. It's just us sending pictures of pizza to each other.
Oh, for real? Oh, yeah. Isn't that, I mean, do you agree with this sentiment? A pizza can be beautiful.
Yeah, of course.
And no beautiful pizza. Nobody has ever given me a beautiful picture of pizza with undercooked cheese. It's got to be nice and brown on the
Yeah,
cheese.
golden brown. Yeah.
Oh my God, a golden brown pizza.
Yeah.
I'd marry a golden brown pizza. Just, they should have put that in American Pie. Forget about an apple pie. A golden brown pizza. Oh, might burn yourself, but it'd be worth it.
Worth it.
All right, what are you thinking about?
So, as I said, we went to Disneyland. And so I've been to Disney World once. I was in 5th grade, so a million years ago. And I knew that like Disneyland was smaller, so I like expected to be like kind of lame. Very cool. It was a cool experience. Very much enjoyed it. We just went and walked around. My son is still, he'll be 16 months later this week, so like he's still young for most of that stuff. We took him on It's a Small World.
Hey,
And my mother and sister-in-law took him on the teacups, which he did not like.
ooh, that's spinny. Yeah.
Yeah, he cried the whole time. I was actually surprised. I was like, "Is it okay?" I asked people like, "He can go on." They're like, "Yeah, he's fine." I'm like, okay, whatever you say. But the thing that I came away from most with it is, so like I said, like he's too small to do most stuff now. And like I've heard you and Austin like talk about this. Like Austin's taken his daughter to Disney World a couple of times over the last few years. She's like 6, and I know you've taken your kids to Disney World a lot. And you like talked about how transformative of an experience it is. And like when we first got into Disneyland, like we just happened to walk in on a parade. So we like found a decent spot to watch the parade for a little bit. And I like had him up on my shoulders and like he was dancing and clapping his hands. Like he doesn't know what he's looking at. But like during the 5 minutes where he was like dancing and clapping his hands, I was like, all right, I get it.
Yeah.
So I came away like very excited to like take him to like not to Disneyland or Disney World or whatever, like when he's older, because like I understand now the aura of it.
This is the best What You Thinking we've ever had. I'm so happy. There is nothing. I can remember the last trip where my kids were small. My youngest daughter was small enough to be on my shoulders. And I was like, through that trip, thinking to myself, this is it. There's nothing like a kid on your shoulders in Disney World.
Yeah.
It is the best. And my kids are 20 and 16 and they don't fit anymore. So I'm glad that you've had that experience. It's wonderful. And that is the thing, right? There's a bunch of rides and stuff. But if you're in the right frame of mind and you're kind of doing it right, and it's not 110 degrees and there's not 400,000 people there, just being there is pleasurable.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very like, yeah, it was, I just didn't think like, I thought it was going to be like, we used to go when I was a kid to like this park called like Storybook Land in Jersey and like Dutch Wonderland in Lancaster, which I'm sure you've been to. But it's just like old, like rinky dink amusement parks. So they're like nice to go to, but like they're not, you know, it's not going to Disney World. And I thought Disneyland would be like that, just like an old kind of like rickety amusement park that people go to for nostalgia purposes. It's like, no, they keep that thing up to date.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. Yeah.
Wonderful. And there's a lot about Disneyland that like it's different, but it can be better. That again, Disney World's 4 parks and 2 water parks, and it's so spread out. You have to take a bus to everything. And Disneyland is just 2 separate parks across a plaza from each other, so you don't have to get on a bus. You can just you can take it all in. No, it's different, but it's awesome in its own way. I'm the happiest boy that ever was that you had a wonderful Disneyland experience. So I've been thinking about this, and I just have been thinking about like, could I get an otter or a penguin as a pet? Because they seem like the friendliest animals in the zoo. And it seems like the answer is no, because it's illegal. But don't you ever think that to yourself, especially you catch like a good video on Instagram or something. It's like, man, penguins are friendly. I want one to live in my house. Or
when I was a kid,
otter.
When I was a kid, I desperately wanted a penguin.
So, but like, it's just not done. Apparently it actually is illegal. And it makes me a little bit sad because I kind of still want to get one, but I did read something about that if you wanted to get a penguin, to get an enclosure that would be like good enough that you would be allowed to have the penguin, it would cost $1 million to build that enclosure at your house. So that's probably not going to happen. So then I did see a video of a guy with his pet otter, like hanging out with his dog. But then I looked up if you should have a pet otter, and I wanted to read some of the problems with pet otters that I found on the internet. Otters make loud whistling or screeching noises. They can be very destructive when they don't get what they want. Well, that just sounds like a kid, right? So what's the big deal? You can still get an otter. That's no big deal. Otters have an odor that lingers around them. Their unpleasant smell can permeate a home if they live indoors. They also mark their territory by smearing their feces around, which contributes to the odor. Again, I don't know. Babies smear feces, don't they? Come on, what's the big deal? Get an otter. Aggression when stressed. When otters are agitated or stressed, they can bite and become aggressive. Their bite is sharp and piercing. If you are bitten by an otter, you'll need to treat the wound immediately. And then otters can be destructive. If left untrained, they can leave many droppings around the house. They are wild animals and do not like to be restrained. I don't know. I don't want to be mean to a penguin, but I feel like I could handle the otter smell. I might still get an otter.
What is the otter's capacity for living outside of water?
I don't know. There's a guy in a Barco lounger holding an otter, so at least for 5 minutes he can be outside of water. But I guess you'd have to build like a water slide in your backyard, probably.
Yeah, but they don't have to, like, it's a mammal, right? They don't have to have to be underwater at all times. Yeah, right. Yeah. So it
Otters
seems doable.
Yeah,
it seems doable. I don't know. I think like penguins are pretty nasty. I think just like filthy animals.
Yeah,
like everything's a bathroom. Yeah, kind of thing. Like in the. I don't know if you want a penguin walking around your house.
That'd be a great podcast name for a companion podcast on the KOTN, the podcast network. We're back with Everything's a Bathroom. I was going to do this as what we're thinking. I'll waste it here because you just reminded me of it. My wife and I were at Walmart the other day, and we were looking for something in particular, and we were in the wrong section. And I still can't necessarily see everything, so I don't know what the heck's going on. And my wife goes, "This is diapers." Like we were in the diaper section. But I thought the phrase, "this is diapers," would be like a good catchphrase when something's going wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like I feel like we could get that going. Like if, like when Ohio State couldn't stop Oregon's stretch plays in 2021, like if the press box, if you just turn to me and we're like, "This is diapers," right?
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should get that going.
Try to work on that.
Yeah.
Anybody
just
watching?
Just like describing an experience. Like, oh, like how was your trip? Oh, it was diapers.
Yeah.
And what happened? Like this thing wrong happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Because diapers isn't a naughty word, but you get the message.
It conjures an image. Yeah.
Yeah. How was Disneyland? It was diapers. I'd be so sad if you said that because I would know exactly what you meant. That's not what you said. All right. Wonderful. What are you thinking from Bill Landis? We appreciate you guys making us part of your week here on Kings of Columbus. Again, if you've made it this far, we would direct you to Kings of the North, where we talk about Northern college football, Ohio State included, and Michigan and Notre Dame and Boston College and Syracuse and Iowa State and Oregon and BYU and Utah and Colorado and everybody in the North. We do that twice a week on our Kings of the North YouTube and podcast channels. For now, we always appreciate our producer, Mike Yorostowski, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to Jeremy Birmingham for dropping some recruiting knowledge on here. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Kings of Columbus.